Potatoes are the most consumed vegetable on the planet. Billions of people eat them every single day. And yet, the moment someone hears the word diabetes, the very first thing their doctor says is, "No more potatoes. Cut them out. They spike your sugar." End of conversation. Here is what nobody explains to you. That advice is not just oversimplified. In many cases, it is medically wrong. The problem was never the potato. The potato is a whole food. It grows in the ground. It contains potassium, vitamin C, B6, magnesium, nutrients that most people with diabetes are actually deficient in. The problem is what happens to that potato between the farm and your plate, how you cook it, how you cool it, what you eat it with, and when you eat it during the day. Those four factors can change your blood sugar response by as much as 40 to 50%. That is not a small margin. That is the difference between a glucose spike that quietly damages your blood vessels and one your body handles cleanly without breaking a sweat. What I am about to walk you through is not a permission slip to eat whatever you want. This is a precise, evidence-based guide to eating potatoes in a way that respects your metabolism instead of fighting it. And the reason you have never heard this at an appointment is simple. There is no time and no incentive to teach you food science in a 12-minute office visit. So let me do it here. To understand why any of this matters, you first need to know what actually happens inside your body when you eat a potato. Because most people have no idea, and that gap in understanding is exactly where the damage starts. A potato is mostly starch. Starch is not some exotic chemical. It is simply long chains of glucose molecules packed tightly together. Think of it like a rope made of hundreds of tiny sugar beads strung end to end. When a hot, freshly cooked potato enters your stomach, digestive enzymes called amylases go to work immediately. They cut those chains apart fast. Within minutes, individual glucose molecules flood into your bloodstream. Your pancreas detects that surge and fires insulin, the hormone that tells your cells to open up and absorb the glucose. In a healthy person, this system handles the load smoothly. Sugar goes up, insulin brings it down, balance is restored. But in someone with type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, the cells do not respond efficiently to that insulin signal. The door does not open properly. Glucose stays elevated in the blood for longer, and every single one of those prolonged spikes does cumulative damage to the endothelium, the inner lining of your blood vessels, to the small nerves in your hands and feet, to the filtering units inside your kidneys, to the tiny blood vessels in the back of your eyes. Scientists measure how fast a food sends glucose into the blood using something called the glycemic index. Pure glucose scores 100. A plain boiled potato lands around 78 to 82, which is high. When your doctor sees that number, the conversation ends right there. Avoid it. But here is what that number does not tell you. It is not fixed. It changes dramatically depending on what you do to that potato before it reaches your mouth. And that is exactly where most dietary advice, and frankly most doctors, stop too early. This is where things get genuinely interesting, and where most people have never been given the full picture. Because there is a simple, well-documented trick that changes how your body processes a potato, and it requires no special ingredient, no supplement, no prescription. It requires a refrigerator and a few hours of patience. When you cook a potato and then let it cool down, something happens at the molecular level that most doctors never mention. The starch molecules, those long glucose chains we just talked about, begin to rearrange themselves. They fold back into tighter, more crystalline structures that your digestive enzymes cannot break apart as easily. Scientists call this process retrogradation. The resulting starch is called resistant starch because it literally resists digestion in your small intestine. Instead of being broken down into glucose and flooding your bloodstream, it passes through to your large intestine, where gut bacteria ferment it slowly. The result is dramatic. Studies show that cooling a cooked potato can reduce its glycemic response by roughly 20 to 30%. Here is the practical part. A potato salad served cold produces a measurably lower blood sugar spike than the same potato eaten hot off the stove. A boiled potato cooled overnight in the fridge and gently reheated the next day still retains a significant portion of that resistant starch, even after rewarming. This is not a fringe theory circulating on health blogs. This is published metabolic research from peer-reviewed journals. The same potato, prepared two different ways, behaves like two completely different foods inside your body. Your glucose meter will confirm it. Now, cooling is powerful, but it is only one piece of the equation. because how you cook that potato in the first place matters just as much as whether you cool it afterward, and most people get this part completely wrong. Think about the four most common ways people prepare potatoes: baking, boiling, mashing, and frying. On paper, the nutritional content is nearly identical. Same calories, same carbohydrate count, same vitamins. But your blood sugar does not read nutrition labels. It responds to physical structure, and each of those methods creates a radically different structure inside that potato. Baking at high heat aggressively breaks down the starch architecture. The intense dry heat shatters the cell walls and exposes maximum starch surface area to your digestive enzymes. A baked potato produces one of the highest glycemic responses of any whole food. Mashing takes it a step further. When you crush a potato into a soft, uniform paste, you destroy every remaining cell wall. You are essentially pre-digesting the food before it even reaches your stomach. Your enzymes barely have to work. Glucose hits your bloodstream almost instantly. Frying adds fat, which does slow gastric emptying somewhat, but it also introduces inflammatory compounds from heated oils and loads extra calories that worsen insulin resistance over time. You slow the spike slightly while making the underlying disease worse. That is not a trade worth making. Boiling, especially whole and unpeeled, preserves far more of the intact cell structure. The starch stays partially trapped inside those cell walls, which physically slows enzyme access. Your body still digests it, but at a pace your pancreas can actually manage. Nutritionists call this the food matrix, the idea that the physical structure of a food matters as much as its chemical composition. A whole boiled potato and a mound of mashed potato contain identical nutrients on paper, but your blood sugar will tell a very different story. And leaving the skin on adds fiber, which slows glucose absorption even further. If there is one single rule that can protect your blood sugar more than any other, it is this: never eat a potato by itself. The moment you pair a potato with protein, healthy fat, fiber, or something acidic, you fundamentally change the speed at which glucose enters your bloodstream. Not by a little, by a lot. And the science behind each of those pairings is clear. Protein triggers a hormone called GLP-1, which slows gastric emptying. That means food sits in your stomach longer before it moves into the small intestine, and glucose trickles into your blood instead of flooding it. Fat does something similar. It delays the transfer of food from the stomach to the intestine, buying your pancreas time to manage the glucose load in manageable waves instead of one overwhelming surge. Fiber creates a physical gel-like barrier inside your gut that literally gets in the way of starch digestion. Enzymes have to work through that barrier before they can reach the glucose chains, and that delay is measurable on a glucose monitor. Then there is acid, vinegar, lemon juice, fermented vegetables. Clinical studies have shown that adding an acidic component to a starchy meal can reduce the glycemic response by up to 30%. The acid slows enzyme activity and changes how quickly your stomach empties its contents. Put this together and the practical picture becomes very clear. A cold potato salad dressed with olive oil and vinegar served alongside grilled chicken and a side of vegetables is a metabolically intelligent meal. A plain baked potato eaten on its own with nothing but butter is a glucose bomb. Same vegetable, completely different outcomes. The difference was never the potato, it was the context around it. And that brings up something I want to address directly. Everything we have covered so far points to the same conclusion. Managing blood sugar is not about avoiding one food. It is about understanding how your entire metabolic system responds, how your pancreas handles insulin, how your vessels absorb the impact, how your body processes glucose hour by hour. That raises a real question. When was the last time you actually had your blood sugar properly evaluated? Not a single fasting glucose number taken on one morning, but a thorough screening that shows you where you genuinely stand. Most people with prediabetes have no idea they have it. There are no obvious symptoms. The damage accumulates silently in the vessels, the kidneys, and the nerves for years before anything shows up on a basic lab panel. If anything in this video has made you pause and think, here is what I would tell you to do as a next step. Care Health is a free platform that connects you with diabetes screenings, blood sugar monitoring programs, and clinical trials for new diabetes treatments in your area. You fill in a short form, date of birth, gender, a couple of basic questions, takes about 30 seconds, and Care Health matches you with relevant options near you. No cost, no commitment. The link is in the description below, or you can scan the QR code on your screen right now by pointing your phone camera at it. Knowing your numbers is the foundation of everything else we are going to talk about today. Now, back to what you need to know about potatoes and your blood sugar. Now let me talk about two things that most dietary advice either gets wrong or skips entirely. How much potato you should actually eat and when during the day you should eat it, because both of those factors matter far more than most people realize. A clinically reasonable serving of potato for someone managing blood sugar is roughly the size of a tennis ball or a closed fist. That is about 100 to 150 grams of cooked potato. When I tell patients that number, they often look disappointed. But here is what they do not account for. When that portion is combined properly with protein, vegetables, healthy fat, and something acidic, it is a genuinely satisfying plate of food. You are not sitting down to a sad little cube of potato on an empty dish. You are eating a complete, well-structured meal. That portion is not deprivation, it is precision. Now, timing. This is where circadian biology enters the picture, and almost nobody talks about it. Your body does not process the same food the same way at every hour of the day. Insulin sensitivity is naturally higher in the morning and midday hours. Your muscle cells are more receptive to insulin's signal, more willing to absorb glucose from the blood. By evening, that sensitivity drops. A potato at lunch is metabolically a completely different event than the exact same potato at 8 p.m. If you are going to include potatoes, lunch is the optimal window, dinner is the worst. One more tool that costs you nothing. Meal sequencing. Studies show that when you eat your vegetables and protein first, before the starchy component, the post-meal glucose spike is significantly lower than when you eat the starch first. Same food, same total meal, different order, different blood sugar result. Eat your salad, eat your chicken, then eat your potato. That sequence alone can meaningfully flatten the curve. Now, everything I have said so far applies to potatoes in general, but not all potatoes are the same. And if you are standing in the grocery store trying to make a smart choice, what you reach for matters. There are two broad categories of potato, and the difference between them comes down to starch composition. Waxy potatoes, the red-skinned ones. New potatoes, fingerlings. Those small, firm varieties that hold their shape when you cook them contain more of a starch type called amylose. Amylose has a tighter molecular structure. It resists digestion more effectively and produces a lower glycemic response. These are the potatoes that work in your favor. Starchy, fluffy potatoes, your russets, your large Idaho baking potatoes, contain more of a different starch called amyloleptin. Amyloleptin has a branched, open structure that digestive enzymes tear apart quickly. It breaks down fast, glucose hits the blood fast, and your pancreas scrambles to keep up. These are the potatoes that cause the sharpest spikes. Sweet potatoes sit in an interesting middle ground. They do have a lower glycemic index than white russets, and they contain more fiber, which slows digestion. But they are not a free pass. A large baked sweet potato still produces a significant glucose response, especially when eaten alone or late in the day. The word sweet is not just a name. There is real sugar in there, and your bloodstream knows it. The practical takeaway at the grocery store is straightforward. Reach for the small, waxy, thin-skinned varieties. Pass on the large, fluffy baking potatoes. And regardless of which variety you choose, every preparation principle we have covered still applies. A cold, waxy potato salad dressed with olive oil and vinegar, served alongside protein and vegetables at lunch, is the best-case scenario for your blood sugar. A large baked russet loaded with sour cream, eaten by itself at 9 p.m. is the worst. Same vegetable, same grocery aisle, completely different metabolic outcomes. Now I need to draw a very clear line, because this is where most of the confusion lives. Everything we have talked about so far applies to real potatoes. Whole potatoes that you can hold in your hand, that still have skin, that still have structure. What I am about to say does not apply to what the food industry has turned potatoes into, because those are not potatoes anymore. Not in any meaningful metabolic sense. French fries, potato chips, instant mashed potato flakes, frozen hash browns. The processing those products go through destroys every protective feature we have discussed. Cell walls, gone. Fiber, stripped. Resistant starch, non-existent. What remains is naked starch with maximum surface area, soaked in industrial seed oils, loaded with sodium and packaged for convenience. Instant mashed potatoes have a glycemic index that rivals pure glucose. You might as well dissolve sugar into a bowl and eat it with a spoon. French fries combine the worst of both worlds. Maximal starch exposure that spikes your blood sugar as fast as physiologically possible, plus inflammatory oils heated to temperatures where they degrade into compounds that actively worsen insulin resistance over time. Here is why this matters beyond your own kitchen. When studies come out showing that potatoes are bad for diabetics, and those headlines get repeated by every health website on the internet, they are almost always measuring populations eating processed potato products. Drive-through fries, cafeteria hash browns, bags of chips, not whole-boiled potatoes prepared with care and combined with protein and vegetables. That critical distinction gets buried in the headline, and it costs millions of people a food they could safely and beneficially enjoy. The rule is simple enough to remember permanently. If the potato still looks like a potato, you are working with real food. If it comes from a box, a bag, or a deep fryer, it is a different substance entirely, and it does not belong anywhere near a blood sugar management plan. And this leads directly to something that has been sitting underneath this entire conversation. The advice you were given about potatoes was probably not wrong, it was incomplete. And incomplete advice, when it comes to a disease that damages your body silently over years, has real consequences. Here is what happens in most doctors' offices. A patient gets a diabetes diagnosis or a pre-diabetes warning. The doctor hands them a printed sheet with 2 columns, foods to eat, foods to avoid. Potatoes are on the avoid list, somewhere between white bread and candy. The conversation moves on. That interaction takes about 90 seconds of a 12-minute appointment. The advice is not wrong in spirit. Reducing high glycemic foods does help control blood sugar. Nobody disputes that, but it is incomplete, and incomplete advice creates a specific problem. When you tell a patient to eliminate a staple food without explaining any of the nuance, one of 2 things happens. Either they comply strictly and lose a genuinely nutrient-dense food unnecessarily. Potatoes are rich in potassium, vitamin C, B6, and magnesium, minerals that many diabetic patients are actually deficient in. Cutting potatoes entirely can worsen those deficiencies while the patient believes they are doing everything right. Or the opposite happens. They feel the dietary restrictions are too extreme, too joyless, too far removed from how they actually eat and live. They follow the sheet for 2 weeks, give up, and go back to eating everything with no strategy at all, no portion awareness, no timing, no combinations. The diet failed them, so they abandon the whole concept. The better approach, the one actually supported by metabolic research, is not to ban the potato. It is to teach the patient how to eat it correctly, cooled, combined with protein and fat and acid, portioned to a fist-sized serving, eaten at lunch rather than dinner, sequenced after vegetables and protein on the plate. That is a strategy a person can sustain for years because it does not require them to give up a food they genuinely enjoy. Your doctor is not the villain here. Their time is genuinely limited, and a 12-minute appointment cannot cover food science, circadian biology, and resistant starch chemistry. That does not mean the advice was wrong. It means it was incomplete, and filling in those gaps yourself is not going against your doctor. It is finishing the conversation they did not have time to have with you. Let me bring everything together into something you can actually use, starting tomorrow morning, because knowing the science is worthless if you do not have a system to apply it, and a system only works if it is simple enough that you will actually follow it week after week. Here is your practical potato protocol. On Sunday, boil a batch of small waxy potatoes, the red-skinned or fingerling variety, whole and unpeeled. Let them cool completely, then put them in a container in your fridge. They will keep for 4 to 5 days. That single act of cooling converts a significant portion of the starch into resistant starch, and it stays that way even if you gently rewarm them later. You have just created your base ingredient for the entire week. During the week, use those potatoes in simple meals built around the combination principle. Slice them into a salad with olive oil, a splash of vinegar, grilled chicken or fish, and whatever vegetables you enjoy. That is a metabolically intelligent lunch. Every protective mechanism we discussed is working at once. Resistant starch from the cooling, fat and acid slowing gastric emptying, protein triggering GLP-1, fiber from the skin and vegetables creating a physical barrier in the gut, and you are eating it at midday when your insulin sensitivity is at its highest. Keep your portion to about a fist-sized serving per meal. Eat your vegetables and protein first, potato last. That sequencing alone measurably flattens the glucose curve. If you own a glucometer, here is something worth doing at least once. Check your blood sugar 1 hour and 2 hours after a potato meal prepared this way, then compare it to a meal where you ate a hot-baked potato by itself. Your own numbers will tell you more than any guideline ever could, because everyone's metabolism responds slightly differently. Your personal data is the most valuable tool you have. One more thing worth understanding. This is not a potato diet. This is a framework for thinking about all starchy foods. The same principles, cooling, combining, portioning, timing, sequencing, apply to rice, bread, pasta, and every other carbohydrate that raises your blood sugar. Once you internalize these mechanics for potatoes, you have a template that works across your entire plate for the rest of your life. So let me leave you with the essentials. The potato is not your enemy. It never was. Preparation is everything. Cold beats hot, combined beats alone. Lunch beats dinner, whole beats processed. And consistency beats perfection. You do not need to eat perfectly every single day. You need to understand what is happening inside your body and make small informed adjustments that you can sustain. That is not a diet. That is a permanent shift in how you relate to food, and it is available to you right now without spending $1 or getting a prescription. Everything we covered today is for your understanding and education. Your situation is specific to you, and using this as a starting point for a real conversation with your doctor will always be more useful than trying to manage things entirely on your own. And remember, that free diabetes screening link is in the description. 30 seconds to check what options are available near you. Your blood sugar is not something to guess about, it is something to know. Take care of yourself.